He found an injured woman sleeping with twin babies in his wagon until her violent fiancé arrived. The wagon creaked as it settled beneath the pines, the wind nudging its canvas like a hand brushing hair from a tired face. Morning had not yet broken fully. A thin blue veil lingered above the hills, and the scent of last night's fire clung faintly to the ashes. Elias' heart stood beside the wheel, hands resting on the wood as if listening through it. The way some men pressed ears to railroad tracks. Something wasn't right. The weight was wrong. He climbed up slow, boots soft on the wheel hub, the way a man climbs who doesn't want to frighten whatever silence is sleeping there. He pulled back the flap. She lay curled inside like some small, hunted creature, a woman no older than 30. Her hair damp and stuck to her forehead, blood dried in dark rust along her ribs. Her dress was torn across one shoulder, and beneath her, nestled like two breaths she hadn't yet exhaled, were twin babies. Swaddled in a tattered shawl, they slept against her chest, their small mouths moving as though dreaming of milk. Elias did not move. His breath caught somewhere between his ribs and his throat. This was no accident, no wanderer looking for shelter. This was someone hiding. The woman's eyes opened slowly, brown, deep-set, rimmed with exhaustion and terror. She gripped the infants tighter, tried to sit up, but winced. Her voice came raw and low. "Don't touch us." Elias held up his hands, palms open, wide enough to show they bore no threat. He didn't speak, just stepped down from the wagon and reached for his coat, laying it on the edge where she could see. She blinked at it, then back at him, as if unsure whether this was a trick or some strange grace. He crouched by the fire, stirred the coals until they glowed. The water pot hissed as he poured it, setting a tin cup near the wagon wheel. Beside it he left bread, a wedge of cheese wrapped in waxcloth, and then he sat back on his haunches, back against a rock, gaze cast into the trees like he'd already forgotten she was there. She drank before the sun broke the horizon, ate slowly. The twins stirred only once, soft mewling noises that quieted when she curled tighter around them. He didn't ask her name. He just waited. Elias' heart had not spoken more than a dozen words to anyone in months. Since burying his wife, he'd found little use for language beyond what the horses needed and the general store required. His ranch sat 2 miles up the trail, a modest homestead, built with his own hands when he was young and foolish and believed in big things. He didn't believe in much now. Only work. Only stillness. Only the quiet ache of a man who'd loved and lost enough to grow careful with what little feeling he had left. When the woman slept again, curled like a fern in frost, Elias gathered the reins and began the long walk home, the wagon trailing behind like a second breath. He did not look back. The homestead appeared near midday, its fence leaning, the barn weather-beaten and missing slats. But the porch held a chair and the smell of dried sage from the rafters. The house was clean if silent. He carried her in, slow and steady, like hauling a broken branch that still bore fruit. She did not wake. He laid her on the bed meant for guests, though none had crossed his threshold in years, and tucked the babies beside her. The taller twin stirred, tiny hand curled into a loose fist. Elias brushed the boy's forehead with one knuckle, unsure why it shook something loose in his chest. He retreated. Let them rest. The next 2 days passed in soft rhythms. Elias brought food, water, clean cloths. He said little. But she watched him now, eyes less guarded, the way one watches an animal that might turn kind. When she finally spoke again, it was just above a whisper. "Who are you?" "Elias." "You live here?" He nodded. She looked down at the babies, then back at him. "I didn't know where else to go." He didn't ask more. Just turned, hands in his pockets, and walked back into the open air. "That night," she cried. He heard it through the walls, the soft rattle of grief held too long. Not loud, not broken, just quiet, and tired, and alone. He made a cot by the hearth and stayed there. In the morning she was standing, unsteady, hand on the wall for balance, but upright. Her voice held more shape now. "I need to leave." Elias didn't argue. He just asked, quiet, steady, "Where would you go?" She didn't answer. Her gaze dropped to the babies. One stirred, then the other. She swallowed. "I don't want to put you in danger." Elias looked at the child yawning in her arms, then at her. "You already did," he said. It wasn't anger. It was truth. Her back straightened, but not in pride, in shame. I didn't mean to. You needed shelter. I had some. Why? He paused, looked out the window, where the trees caught light like the sky was bleeding through their branches. Because you were bleeding, too. For a moment, the room said the fire crackled. The wind nudged the window panes. Then the baby in her left arm started to cry. Elias stepped forward, slowly. She tensed but didn't back away. He reached out, awkward, and she handed him the child. It was heavier than he expected, warm, fragile, so new it hurt his hands just to hold it. He bounced it gently, the way he remembered his wife doing once. Just once, before the earth swallowed her and their son together. The baby quieted. She stared at him, lips parted slightly. What's his name? She hesitated. James. And the other? Lydia. He nodded, said. She sat back on the bed, watching him hold the child. He's like you, she said. Quiet. No, Elias smiled faintly. Just thinking. Her eyes lowered. Then she whispered, his father isn't quiet. He's not kind. He doesn't forgive. Elias did not ask further. But he looked down at James, whose fingers were now curled into the collar of Elias' coat, and something sharp and slow unfurled in his chest. That night, just after dusk, the wind changed. Elias was chopping wood near the fence when the horses grew restless. He stilled. The air smelled different: leather, smoke, sweat. Not his. He stepped up the slope, eyes scanning the horizon, and there, rising to the dying light, was a cloud of dust, a single rider, far off but coming fast. Elias watched, jaw clenched. He turned toward the cabin, where soft lamplight spilled through the window and the woman sat nursing her twins. He walked back with purpose now, not slow, not gentle. Inside, she looked up, sensing the change. He said only this: you need to hide. Then he reached for the rifle beneath the hearth, and the baby, asleep in his arms, didn't stir. She stood at the edge of the porch, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, the babies tucked against her chest like secrets. The morning sun was rising slow over the hills, washing the frostbitten land in soft gold. Her hair, dark and unbrushed, caught the light like river reeds after storm. She didn't speak, just watched Elias move through the yard with a steady gait, carrying a bucket to the trough, as if the world hadn't tilted just days ago when he found her curled like a broken wing inside his wagon. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier than he expected. My name's Clara. He didn't look at her, but paused just long enough for the water to slosh over the edge of the bucket. Clara Reynolds. From Virginia, originally. Still, he said, but he did set the bucket down with a little more care than usual. The silence between them wasn't heavy, not awkward. It was shaped like understanding, as if words weren't required unless they mattered. She seemed to understand this, too, and in that shared quiet, she spoke again. I came west of man, Thomas Creed, a trader. He moves between towns with wagons and money and charm slick as oil. That last word hung in the air. Not bitterness, just clarity. He was good at pretending. Real good, till he wasn't. Elias wiped his hands on his pants, then looked up at her finally. He do that to you? Clara's jaw tightened. Her gaze dropped to the twins, who stirred faintly, the taller one twitching a leg beneath the blanket. He didn't want the babies. Thought they'd slow him down. Said I owed him something for feeding me, keeping me alive. When I got too mouthy, he fixed that. Elias didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes darkened, like a sky that knew lightning was near. I left in the night, took what I could carry, rode till the horse gave out. Thought I'd die in that canyon. He remembered the way she looked when he found her, bloodied, half-starved, wrapped around those babies like they were the last warm thing left in the world. You didn't die, he said. She gave a small laugh, sharp and brief. No, but I don't know if that was luck or punishment. The wind picked up, rustling the dry brush near the edge of the field. Elias turned toward the barn. He ain't gonna find you here. Clara raised her head, eyes narrowed in the light. You don't know him. I know men like him. He opened the barn door, letting it swing wide with a creak. The horses stirred inside. One nickered softly. She stepped off the porch, slow but firm, and followed him. I don't want to bring trouble on you, Elias. He didn't answer right away. He found the saddle blanket, brushed it down smooth. Then don't. Stay until you're ready. Then you leave if you have to. Or don't. Her steps faltered. You don't know what you're offering. He glanced over his shoulder, voice steady as stone. Maybe you don't know what you're worth. She said nothing to that, just stood there, watching him work, her grip on the baby shifting slightly, like she was holding more than weight, like she was holding the first kindness she'd seen in a long time. By afternoon, she had begun to walk the yard, slowly, with the twin swaddled against her chest. Her limp hadn't healed, but she pushed through it, jaw tight. She asked where the well was, and Elias pointed. Then he handed her the rope and pulley and said nothing more. Let her draw her own water. Let her feel useful again. That night, she rocked one baby in each arm on the porch. Elias watched from the steps below, his arms resting on his knees. Do they know? She looked down at them, puzzled. Know what? How close they came to being fatherless. She stared at him for a long moment, eyes dark and unreadable. They know safety now. That's more than they had before. He nodded. The next day, Martha Tills came by, a stout, sharp-eyed widow who ran the dry goods store with her sons and didn't much care for gossip. She brought a parcel of milk, a soft dress, and half a loaf of sweetbread. She didn't ask questions, only looked Clara up and down and said, I lost a child once. Let her be. Clara thanked her with a bowed head. Martha tipped her hat to Elias and walked off without another word. That evening, Clara offered to help mend the coop fence. Elias watched her work, awkward but determined, fingers trembling as she looped wire. When she caught him watching, she didn't blush. She simply said, I used to sew curtains. Now I tie chicken wire. Life's funny that way. He smiled just slightly. That night, he added more wood to the stove and left a clean wool blanket folded at the foot of her bed. On the third morning, Clara stood by the barn before dawn, her dress cinched with twine at the waist, sleeves rolled. Teach me to saddle a horse, she said. Elias considered her, then nodded. They worked in silence, the babies asleep inside. She listened closely, moved with care. He guided her hands, not touching, just watching, letting her learn without judgment. When she finally cinched the strap tight and stepped back, there was pride in her posture. Elias looked at her, quiet and full of thought. You ever think about staying? She looked away, toward the hills. I think about it too much. That's why I haven't run. The wind shifted. The clouds were building again. He'll come, Elias, she said after a long pause. You know that, don't you? Let him. She turned to him, fierce now. He won't stop at words. I won't stop at silence. Her breath caught. She searched his face. No rage, no fire, just truth, thick as iron. The babies cried inside. She turned but paused at the door. Why are you helping me? He stood still, hands at his sides. Because I didn't get to help the last time. That night, the stars scattered like firefly sparks across the black. Elias sat near the fence, wielding a scrap of wood, the knife making slow, clean strokes. Clara stood inside the doorway, twins asleep behind her. She watched him as if trying to memorize his shape against the dark. A sound rose on the wind, far off, faint but wrong. She stiffened. A horse. Elias stood. Clara stepped onto the porch, heart in her throat. It's too soon, she whispered. He found us. Elias moved toward the barn. Calm, methodical. Clara gripped the rail. Elias, he'll take them. He'll take them just to break me. Elias returned with his rifle, his expression unreadable. Not tonight, he said. The hoofbeats grew louder, rhythmic like thunder against stone. Clara backed toward the door, clutching the frame. The twins began to stir. A figure crested the ridge. Clara's breath hitched. But it wasn't Thomas. It was a boy, no more than 15. Pale, thin, shoulders sharp under a too-large coat. His hat hung low, and his voice trembled when he spoke. You Elias Hart? Elias stepped forward, rifle lowered but ready. Depends who's asking. The boy swallowed. He sent me. Said to give you this. He held out a folded scrap of paper. Elias took it, opened it. The handwriting was neat, sharp, She belongs to me. The babies, too. I'm coming to claim what's mine. No name, no signature, just menace. Elias looked up. He say when? The boy shook his head. Just said soon. Clara stood frozen on the porch, her hand over her mouth. The twins began to cry in unison now. Thin, wavering, frightened sounds. Elias folded the paper. He's close. Clara nodded, voice barely audible. He always sends someone ahead, to see if it's safe. Elias looked to the boy. You ride for him? The boy flinched. I didn't know what he'd do. Then you've done enough. The boy hesitated, then turned and rode back the way he came, dust curling in his wake like smoke from a gunshot. Elias stood at the gate, rifle slung low. Behind him, Clara whispered his name. He turned. She was barefoot now, the babies in her arms, her eyes full of fire and dread. He's coming, Elias. And he'll kill you if you stand in his way. Elias stepped forward, voice low. Then I guess I'll have to make sure he doesn't get the chance. And for the first time, she didn't look afraid. She looked like she believed him. The frost was loosening its grip. Morning came gentler now, with sunlight pooling like spilled honey across the porch rails. Elias stood in the field, repairing the fence line where winter's weight had snapped it. When he saw her, Clara was walking through the tall grass, a baby tucked in each arm, her hem catching dew, her shadow long behind her. She moved with slow purpose, as though each step was a declaration. Her hair had been brushed back, tied with faded ribbon Martha had brought. The wind stirred it loose, but she didn't mind. The twins watched the world from her arms, alert, drowsy, safe. Elias straightened, leaned on the post. He didn't call out, just watched her come into herself one step at a time. She stopped beside the fence and rested the babies on a quilt she'd spread beneath a cottonwood. They cooed and blinked into the sun, tiny hands opening like petals. Clara stood over them, her face turned to the wind. Her eyes were closed, lips parted just slightly, as though tasting the day. Elias couldn't remember the last time he'd seen someone simply feel safe. Later, she found his sketchbook. It had slipped from his coat pocket onto the porch bench, half open to a page he hadn't meant anyone to see. She picked it up with care, as though touching something private. Inside were charcoal sketches of the woods, the hills, the curve of a saddle. But tucked between them were drawings of her, not full portraits. Just fragments, a hand holding a bottle, the soft weight of a baby on her hip, her eyes glancing downward in thought. Lines caught with reverence, not intrusion. She said nothing when he returned from the field. She was sitting on the porch steps, the book resting on her lap, the babies asleep nearby. You draw, she said softly. He looked down, wiped his hands on his trousers. Sometimes. You drew me. He nodded, a little ashamed. You don't think that's strange? He shook his head. I draw what stays with me. She studied his face. There was no flattery in it. Just a man standing quietly in front of what he'd seen and dared to remember. I haven't felt seen in a long time, she said. Not like that. Elias knelt to check the babies. One stirred. He placed a steady hand on the child's back until it stilled again. You're not hard to see, Clara. She swallowed. You think that. But Thomas, he made me believe I was small, foolish, that even the way I cried was wrong. He didn't answer, not with words. But he looked up, and the way he met her eyes said enough, that there was no part of her too much or too little. That night, thunder rolled low in the distance. Elias worked late stacking firewood, while Clara settled the babies inside. The cabin smelled of stew and milk and lamp oil, and when he entered, the warmth met him like arms around his chest. She was rocking Lydia in her arms, singing something faint and tuneless but sweet. He paused in the doorway. She noticed him and stopped, almost sheepish. Old song, she said. My mother's. Keep singing. She smiled, small but real, and did. After she laid the babies down, she joined Elias outside. They sat on the porch, feet bare, watching the sky flicker with lightning far off to the south. The storm wouldn't reach them tonight, just passed by like a memory too stubborn to fade. She turned to him, voice careful. You said you didn't get to help the last time. Who was she? My wife. I'm sorry. It was years ago. Long enough, most folks don't bring it up anymore. But it's still there, isn't it? Some things don't leave. Not really. He nodded, looked at his hands. She died birthing our son. He didn't make it either. Clara said, just shifted closer, shoulder nearly touching his. And you've lived alone since. I've lived quiet since. That's different. A pause. Then, do you want it to stay that way? Elias looked at her. The way her face caught the lamplight through the window, the curve of her jaw, the steadiness in her eyes despite all she'd been through. No, he said. I don't. The quiet settled around them again, softer now. The next morning brought the first laugh. Lydia gripped Elias's thumb while he was trying to change her swaddle. She pulled hard, and he made a noise of surprise that startled her, and she giggled. A true, hiccuping baby laugh. Clara turned from the stove and gasped. Do it again. Elias raised his eyebrows. I'm not sure what I did. Lydia laughed again. Clara laughed, too, the sound like bells in wind. Even James chimed in, not to be outdone. It was the first morning the cabin felt like it might be something more than shelter. They began to fall into rhythm after that. Clara swept the floors while Elias hauled water. He built a cradle from scrap pine. She hemmed old clothes into fresh linens. The porch bloomed with soft conversation, the sound of babies cooing, the scratch of pencil on paper. Still, a shadow clung at the edge of it all. One night, Clara stood in the doorway after putting the twins down, her arms wrapped around herself. I keep waiting for the day I stop looking over my shoulder. Elias didn't move. You don't have to look alone. I'm afraid I'll get you hurt. He turned, stepped closer. Let me decide that. She looked up at him. I don't want to run anymore. Then don't. Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. Later that week, Clara walked into the barn to find Elias standing by the stall, holding a piece of folded paper. He looked up, eyes unreadable. Ryder came through. From town. Clara's heart stilled. What did he say? Didn't say much. Just left this with the blacksmith. Name scribbled on the corner. He handed it to her. Thomas Creed. Her hands shook. It's his handwriting. The note was simple. 6 words. 1 week. Be ready. He's mine. She stared at it, chest heaving. He's coming. Just like he said he would. Elias took the note, folded it, and tucked it into his coat. Then we'll be ready. Clara stepped back. You don't understand. He's not the kind to talk. He'll burn this place to the ground just to prove he can. Elias turned to face her. I've lost everything once. I won't lose it again. It's me he wants. No, Clara, it's control he wants. And that's not something you owe him. She stepped forward, fierce and trembling. If he comes and something happens to you, then I'll have made peace with it, knowing I stood for something worth standing for. She stared at him, eyes brimming. Don't make yourself a martyr. I'm not. I'm making a promise. The barn door slammed as wind rushed through, rattling the boards. The sky outside darkened. Clara looked down at her hands, then at him. Then teach me. He tilted his head. Teach you what? How to shoot. He blinked. She held his gaze. I won't watch you fall for me just to leave my children motherless again. If he comes, I won't run. Not this time. Elias nodded, solemn and proud. Tomorrow. And just before she turned away, she said, I see it now, Elias. Why it never worked with him. Why? Because he needed me afraid. And you let me be brave. The sky was too still. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Elias stood on the porch sharpening a blade slowly against whetstone, each drag soft and rhythmic. Behind him, the house was quiet. Clara had just settled the twins for their nap, and the air inside smelled of soap and oatcakes. He glanced at the barn, then at the horizon. The road stretched long and empty, but he knew that wouldn't last. Clara emerged from the doorway, rifle slung across her shoulder. Her jaw was set, but there was something calm in her eyes, too. Something earned. I can handle it, she said. You don't have to, he replied. She stepped beside him, staring down the road with him. I'm not who I was when you found me. Elias nodded, almost smiling. That's true. They stood like that a while, watching the land hold its silence. Then the birds stopped singing. Dust rose in the distance. Not a cloud, not wind, just one man on a dark horse, riding like he owned the ground beneath him. As he crested a hill, sunlight caught the edge of a silver belt buckle, glinting like a knife. He wore a coat too fine for trail work, boots polished for show, and his posture was straight-backed arrogance. Thomas Creed. Clara exhaled slowly. Her hands curled tighter around the rifle, knuckles pale. Elias didn't move. Creed stopped 10 yards from a porch, still in the saddle, expression calm as coiled rope. "You look well, Clara," he called. "For a woman who ran," she said. He dismounted slowly, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. His voice curled in the air like smoke from a bad fire. "And there he is, the quiet rancher, Elias Hart. I've heard about you." Elias didn't blink. "And I've heard enough about you." Creed smiled with the flat coldness of a man who'd never earned one. "Well, let's not pretend this is about words. I've come for what's mine." He took a step closer. Elias raised the rifle, not aiming, just a reminder. "You came for something you lost the right to." Creed's mouth twitched. "You think love changes the law?" Elias answered without heat. "No, but I think law means nothing when it protects men like you." Clara stepped forward now. Steady, her voice cut clear across the space between them. "You left me in a canyon to die. You hit me. You threatened my children. You think I'm yours because I wore your ring once?" Creed's smile faded. "You are mine. I gave you everything. You ran with my children." Clara's chin lifted. "They're not yours. Not in the ways that count. You think this man can protect you?" Elias stepped forward, slow and solid. "He doesn't need to protect me," Clara said. "He gives me the space to stand." Creed's face changed, not to anger, but something worse, disbelief, as though the woman before him was no longer someone he recognized, and had insulted him more than any wound could. He lunged. The rifle was up before Elias even thought, but it wasn't Elias who fired. It was Clara. One crack of thunder, sharp and final. The bullet struck Creed's shoulder and spun him to the dirt. He shouted, not in pain, but in rage, in disbelief that she'd done it. Clara stood, breathing hard, rifle trembling slightly in her hands. Elias didn't move to take it. Creed crawled to his knees, eyes blazing. "You shot me. You." Clara stepped closer. Her voice broke like ice underfoot. "You don't owe me, Thomas. And you never did." Creed swayed, bleeding into the dust. For a moment, it seemed he might rise again, try again. But then another sound broke the tension. Hooves. Riders. 3 men from town. Martha's eldest, a blacksmith, and old Sheriff Bellamy, who hadn't fired a weapon in years, but still wore his star like it mattered. They rode in without hurry, without show. Just presence. Elias gave a nod. Sheriff Bellamy dismounted and walked toward Creed, who slumped backward into the dust like something rotted finally giving way. "We'll take it from here, Elias," the sheriff said. "Seems this man's got more than a few folks looking for him." Clara lowered the rifle. Her breath slowed. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. Creed was dragged away, half conscious, blood soaking into the earth behind him. Silence followed. Not empty, but cleansed. Inside, James cried. Clara turned toward the door, but Elias touched her arm. "You all right?" She looked at him. Really looked. "I'm not broken. I never thought you were." Then she smiled, small, shaking, beautiful. "Good." A few weeks passed. The trees bloomed with cautious color. The earth thawed. The porch held new chairs. Clara sat in one with Liddy in her arms, James toddling between her knees. Elias built a pen for the chickens, and Martha brought over honeycomb in a clean jar. At night, the 4 of them lay together under the cotton quilt. 2 adults, 2 children, no ghosts. Just breath, warmth, the hush of wind through old beams. One evening, as they watched the sky burn down embers, Clara reached for Elias's hand. "Do you think this'll last?" He looked down at their fingers twined. "I think some things don't have to be loud to be strong." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then I'll stay as long as it's quiet." He turned to her, voice like something rooted deep in the earth. "You're home, Clara." And for the first time, she believed it. So, did he? Because sometimes the fiercest kind of love doesn't announce itself. It arrives without warning and stays. If this tale stirred your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. More soulful stories are riding your way.